In today's video, I wanted to continue my adventure through House Hlaalu's questline featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Welcome to episode 4 of Morrowind Madness, the makeshift series where I attempt to upload an in-depth part for this storyline every day up until Friday. If you're watching these videos at any other time though, I guess the deadline isn't all that relevant to you. In the last part, I had finished taking orders from Adreno. The first quest involved me contacting the Zainab tribe and essentially forcing their hand into a deal. House Hlaalu clearly wants the monopoly on ebony ore. The second quest had me traveling to Azura's coast in search of a shipwreck. The prelude was carrying a Daedric Wakizashi that the house had been searching for. Then, quest number 3 was a nice change of pace. I was told to guard Raylan Tilver's shop in Vivec City from some overly confident thieves. Although, the next set of assignments is where things arguably got even more interesting. After being dismissed by Adreno, I got into contact with Crassius Curio. Uncle Crass's first quest was quite the icebreaker. The councilman had promised to support me if I got naked for him, right then and there. After removing every single article of clothing, leaving just the loincloth, Crassius seemed to like what he was seeing. He offered me the sponsorship. Because of that, his first set of tasks involved me spying on House Hlaalu member Ojal Helvi. The house widely believed that Helvi is suspicious of corruption and abuse of power. Essentially, I had to take orders from Ojal and relay them back to Curio. From there, Crassius would offer me an alternative solution to the quest. It was then my decision on whether or not I'd like to aid the councilman and by extension, the rest of the house, or I could choose to carry out my assignment to the T by bypassing the house and just working with Helvi. For most of these quests, I'd end up choosing the former. Sealed orders that were only meant for Tanissi Ladri, straight to Crassius Curio. Locating stolen documents and revealing the thief to Ojal, whatever maximizes my payday. This is where the story continues. Ready to see what the house brother had in store for me next, and how I could undermine his every move, I returned to Ojal and asked about business. Helvi replied and said that he believes there's an error in some of the documents over in the Hall of Records. Ojal would like for me to go and replace those. Get this though, said Erroneous Documents, the land deeds to the Ascadian Isles. The very same one that Helvi wanted Tanissi to take and make forgeries of. I guess Uncle Crass's mock-ups did the trick and Ojal's getting desperate. Essentially, the house brother wants me to steal the current wrong deed and replace it with this random scroll that he deemed up to date. I could only make it about 10 feet before I cracked open the seal. It was just too tempting. This new deed declared that Ravone Arvel would sell all of his southern lands to Orvis Dren and that his small farmstead by Pelagiad goes to, you guessed it, Ojal Helvi. I'd bet my top septum that Ravone and possibly even Orvis have no clue about this. Well, recalling to Vivec and speaking with Curio, he asked me to hand him the new deed. Allegiances aside, I thought the funnier outcome would be to undermine Helvi here anyways. He just seemed so smug about trying to pull one over on the house. In response to the fake deed, Crassius says that I should still try and complete the assignment for Ojal, so that way he doesn't get suspicious. I need to go and collect the original deed from the Hall of Records. As a token of his appreciation, Curio gifts me with an amulet of domination. Putting on the rubber gloves to handle this one, the necklace can command creatures and humanoids for 10 points for 30 seconds. Definitely could come in handy for what's coming up. So from here, it's off to the Hall of Records. Do you remember the quest Alchemical Formulas? The second one in this series where I had to steal a parchment right out from Moraine Fairness's nose? This task isn't all too dissimilar. There are 2 NPCs standing guard in the room. Speaking with Valvosa Marian, the Hall of Records bookkeeper, I was able to ask her about said erroneous documents. Unsurprisingly, she got upset that word was spreading of possible inaccuracies with the deeds. Rightfully so too, as there are no issues with them. However, her getting angry and shooing me away really doesn't help with my objective. After casing the hall for a bit, I finally got eyes on the Ascadian Isles land deeds. They're in a small lockbox on one of the bookshelves. Unfortunately, just taking the deed is considered theft. Again, makes sense, so I had to try and get crafty. The reason I related this quest back to Alchemical Formulas is because it kinda went the exact same way. I tried for some time to get a clean line of sight on the lockbox. I had the advantage of using the nearby stairwell for cover, but as soon as I turned the corner, Marian's third eye would open. Recently, an awesome viewer commented and said that I should invest in a telekinesis spell. And you know what? You're absolutely right. The only issue is that I've actually finished recording this series, and at this point, there's really no going back. Luckily, this should be the last time you'll see me struggle with stealing things, as the rest of the questline is smooth sailing, I think. In any case, after a while, I just sort of gave up on the sneaky approach and resorted to outright taking it. I did make an enemy out of Marion and Urandal Salandis, but fortunately, I never need to see them again, so those relationships can stay bad. It turns out that this quest has a few different outcomes. If I wanted my character's life to be a bit easier, I could have gone directly to Ravone Arvel, who, by the way, as expected, knows nothing about this. Together, we would have fetched a forged copy of the documents from Baron Aelin, and then that could have been returned to Helvi. This would have resulted in the Murdrum Ring as a reward and a disposition increase with Arvel. Otherwise, following through with Odril's original request sort of mirrors Crassius's version of events. I'd still be sneaking into the Hall of Records and stealing the land deeds. Only with that timeline, I would have been putting the forgeries into the lockbox. By the end, no matter what happens, Helvi always has the same response for the player. By telling him that I've taken care of the matter, he takes my word for it and also takes the inaccurate deed. As a reward, Odril gifts me with 6 scrolls, 3 different ones that all have duplicates. Uth's Hand of Heaven grants levitation for 50 points for 30 seconds. Black Storm damages Magicka for 1 to 10 points for 2 seconds, deals shock damage for 5 to 50 points for 2 seconds, and has another instance of shock damage for 0 to 12 points for another 2 seconds. Then there's Trinasa's Spell Twist. It reflects for 20 to 60% for 30 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, Erroneous Documents. Chatting with Odril again, I cheekily asked him for my next assignment. Helvi mentioned that he's responsible for most of the land in the Ascadian Isles. I wonder how he got that role. At this time of year, he says that he needs to collect rent and taxes from the farmers. So he'd like for me to go and speak with Manarvarnan Adda and Lovan Andis. They each owe Helvi 50 drakes. Interestingly, Odril says that if these farmers refuse to pay, I have the right to kill them. To set an example for the other farmers. How inspiring. Both of these NPCs live by the Arvel and Dren plantations. As per usual, there are a few outcomes for this quest. Honestly, working with Crassius ends up being the easiest one, or rather, the one that requires the least amount of effort. By telling Curio about the situation, he shares his rather humanitarian response. Uncle Crass recognizes that to some, namely him and I, 50 drakes is nothing. However, for these farmers, those septums can make a world of difference. So instead, Curio hands me 500 gold and tells me to pay off the farmers' debts for them. The extra 400 is for me to keep. Say what you will about Crassius's overuse of the words dumpling, pudding, and sweetie, as well as his odd obsession with my character's skin. He can have a soft spot when it counts. Don't get me wrong, this man is still creepier than a Hagraven, but at least he looks out for the little guy. So, like I said, this could technically lead to the end of the quest. All I have to do is return to Odril and hand him the money. However, this would end up being one of the few Helvi-based missions that I actually explored the alternatives for. I decided to go and pay the farmers a visit just to see what that interaction would be like. Unsurprisingly, the NPCs were unable to cough up the gold. They were rather plain and humble about it too. From here, if I really wanted to, I could have killed them, as that was an option, but honestly, it was the last thing on my mind. However, there is an alternative solution to the alternative solution. Lovan Andis offers up his Gwar, Corky. It is possible to bring Corky to the local Gwar herder, Druleen Phelan. There, she'd buy the animal from you for 200 gold, which of course would more than cover the taxes. Then of course, the alternative to the alternative's alternative is that I just pay Odril 100 gold. That's it. At the end of the day, the greedy swit just wants 100 septums. He doesn't ask where it comes from, and the Nerevarine doesn't have to tell. In fact, Helvi says that he didn't actually think I could get the money from the farmers. I guess he just expected me to come back with blood on my hands. Gotta love the confidence there. With that, thus ends the quest, Rent and Taxes. Speaking to the house brother again, I asked him about further business. Helvi replied and said that he needs a shipment of ebony delivered to a friend of his. That's not suspicious at all. Odril hands me 5 pieces of ebony ore and says that they need to get to Dry Varien. From there, Varien will deliver them to, quote, friends of his over on the mainland. It gets even better though. I'm not to breathe a word of this to anyone. I suppose this is the Morrowind equivalent of sending money to an offshore account. So, without trying to spoil much, but probably spoiling something, this is the final quest for Odril's arc. Recalling to Vivek and revealing the plot to Crassius, this ends up being the councilman's gotcha moment. Curio says that this is the last piece of evidence that the house needed. With all of the collected documents, forgeries, and witnesses, House Hlaalu can finally issue an arrest. This wouldn't just be for Odril Helvi, but also for his accomplice, Dry Varien. Uncle Crass urges me to take the ebony ore to Sagunavus Mentetius at Fort Buckmoth. This should be enough to turn the Empire's head and take action. Of course, the final decision is up to the player. Do you want to have Odril and co arrested, or do you want him to get even richer? If you prefer the former, it's quite easy to head to Aldrun and locate Drynar in his home. The dialogue between him and the Nerevarine is quite brief. He takes the ore and dismisses the player. From there, you can head back to Caldera, reunite with Helvi, receive 500 gold, and close out his story arc. Or, if you want to be the Chatavarine, you could just head south of Aldrun and find Mentetius at Fort Buckmoth. It's funny, the Legion doesn't care about a whole lot on Vvardenfell. However, if you dare mention ebony ore in front of them, Imperial milk starts gushing out of their ears. Sagunavus began grilling me on why I was carrying ebony around. When I told him that I was the middleman for Odril Helvi, he then asked who the delivery was for. Interestingly, I had the option to lie here. I guess if I wanted to, I could have covered for Drynar. However, I couldn't give an Argonian's cloaca about Varien. So, throwing him under the bus too, Mentetius told me to hand over the ore and that he'd make the necessary arrests. Hey, that works for me. The wannabe ender pearls were weighing me down anyways. Sagunavus said that this matter was officially out of my hands, and from here, I was free and clear to return to Curio. For my own curiosity, I decided to check in on Odril over in Caldera. At the time, I didn't know that the arrest was going to be instant. I thought there might have been some Scooby-Doo if it weren't for you meddling kids sort of wrap-up, but not quite. Helvi was gone. One source of House Hlaalu's corruption was taken care of, but I'd have to imagine that the roots run deep. As the saying goes, one bad apple spoils the bunch. Returning to Crassius, he congratulated me for a job well done. Apparently, Odril was sent to some prison ship. I'd have to imagine it's set course for the Imperial City. As a reward for the grand performance, Curio gifts me with 2 rings. The first is the Eye Maze ring. This grants the wearer with Chameleon for 10 to 40% for 10 seconds. The second is the Dire Shardbolt ring. It deals 5 to 11 points of frost damage on target. With that, thus ends the quest, Shipment of Ebony. With Odril Helvi officially out of the picture, the story wraps back around to Crassius Curio. Now that all the prerequisite quests are over and done with, I can finally get assignments directly from Uncle Crass. Although, I'm not sure I totally want to. Taking a deep breath, I approached the councilman and asked about business. Curio replied and said that he wants me to look into someone by the name of Velfred the Outlaw. Since I apparently have tons of experience with ebony smuggling, Crassius thinks that this should be a piece of cake. Apparently, Velfred has been selling his own ebony on the side and, quote, hasn't been paying House Hlaalu the proper respect. I'm assuming that just means that we haven't been able to take a cut of the profits, or that there's another forced merger on the horizon. According to Curio, Velfred usually docks somewhere by the fishing village of Hlaalu. If Mr. Outlaw refuses to listen to reason, I have permission to use the old-fashioned techniques. At worst, I could even Marudius Flayus him, if you know what I mean. Arriving at the Bitter Coast, I began looking around for Velfred. My first mistake was taking Curio's directions literally. He said that the Nord usually docks at Hlaalu. Well, I wasn't seeing any sketchy barbarians in the area. After looking around for a bit, I finally decided to ask for his whereabouts. Thanks to a Hlaalu guard, I learned that the Gritwake, Velfred's ship, is actually further along the coast. It's close to the village, but a little more off the beaten path. Best guesses there is that the crew wants to avoid unwanted attention, aka prying eyes from just about everyone. Following the updated directions, it didn't take me too long to reach the Gritwake. Furthermore, Velfred would end up being one of the 2 pirate barbarians atop the deck. Chatting with the Nord, my only dialogue option was to tell him to respect House Hlaalu. It's kind of funny too, because his opening dialogue was rather pleasant and quite conversational. Or it was a diss, I couldn't quite tell. With a disposition of only 46, the outlaw replies and simply tells me to back off. A lesser man would have taken those as fighting words. A greater one, though, would take that as a challenge. Charming Velfred with my foolproof spells, he quickly changed his mind on the topic of respect. Again, with further context clues, I'm pretty sure respect means a cut of the profits, the Hlaalu tax, if you will. He says that he'll pay up, but House Hlaalu better keep up with their end of the bargain. Yeah, not my jurisdiction, not my problem. Before leaving, I wanted to quickly explore the Gritwake. As far as ships go, this was definitely a boat. There were a few other barbarians on board, although none of them really had anything interesting or relevant to say. There's also a fair share of cargo that, if you really wanted, you could try and take. This includes a lot of ebony ore, which, thanks to the Nerevarine, the troll toll of House Hlaalu's monopoly only grows. You could goad the outlaw into fighting you, which can easily be done by baiting him via frenzy, or just by outright choosing violence. The former results in a simple 1v1 with the level 17 Nord Barbarian, while the latter results in an all-out brawl with the rest of the Nords. Interestingly, the crew is carrying a few ash statues that they apparently get touchy about. If you wanted to feel even more justified in executing them, you could always mention the evil relics to Velfred. This apparently gets his goat and results in him making the first move. Either way, as soon as the house has been respected, that's it for the Gritwake and its crew. There are some skill books in the captain's cabin if you wanted to look into those. Recalling to Vivek and reporting to Crassius, he rewarded me with 1,000 septums. Hey, with payouts like those, he could call me Dumpling all he'd like. With that, thus ends the quest, Velfred the Outlaw. Chatting again with Crassius, our work together comes to a temporary halt. I knew this day would come, but I didn't think it would be so soon. Curio refuses to continue our operations due to my rank and lack of Stronghold. He needs me to be a higher level than Kinsman, and my Stronghold needs to have reached phase 2 of construction. Considering the suggested alternative is that I move on to Neleno and Adreno for quests, this clearly can't be put off. Luckily, the first of those conditions is pretty easy to meet. With updated skills and light armor, marksman, mercantile, security, shortblade, or speechcraft, as well as honed abilities of speed and agility, Crassius is more than happy to promote me on the spot. I went from kinsman to house cousin to house brother. The next step up would be house father, but without a stronghold, I can't progress any further. So the obvious thing to do is to get to it on my personal estate. Uncle Crass says that the person to speak with is Dondos Dryler at the Hlaalu Council Manor over in Balmora. So do you remember a while back, in fact I think it was the beginning of this series, I mentioned that you might want to open that Morrowind savings account? Well, that was my terrible way of foreshadowing this. Phase 1 of building Rethan Manor. Traveling to the Council Manor, I brought up the Stronghold with Dryler, and pretty much immediately we got into pre-construction talk. In order to start building, House Hlaalu needs permission, aka a construction contract from Duke Vidam Dren. Furthermore, we also need a land deed. This can be acquired from Baron Aelin in the Hlaalu Vaults. So, with this being my third time going through the whole Build a Stronghold quest, I more or less knew what was in store for me. For the more part, speaking with Duke Vidam Dren was a walk in the park. As per usual, the Nerevarine heads to Ebonheart and brings up the Stronghold. The Duke hits you with the, I don't know, will you use it to defend Vardenfell? The Nerevarine gives him 2 thumbs up while crossing every other part of their body, and it's as easy as that. Sure, if people attack Rethan Manor, I'll defend it, but nothing really more beyond that. With the construction contract in hand, it's time for the less part. Having just done House Telvanni recently, the wizards needed 2 grand soul gems. Not the easiest thing to get a hold of, but the 5-finger discount worked wonders for that. As for House Hlaalu, well, the only things they seem to understand are money and business interactions. Chatting with Baron Aelin, he said that he'd be more than willing to give me the land deed. Only first, we need to settle the method of payment. It only took me about 5 minutes to realize that the clerk had a separate barter option and that my game wasn't bugged. Taking a look at his wares, there's the treasury report, that would have been nice, and oh, there's the land deed to Rethan Manor, 5,000 gold. Yeesh. While it may seem like they're sticking a vacuum in your pocket, this is technically an investment. Plus, if you were smart with your spending, you could easily find yourself in an early retirement here. A fun fact that I had actually forgotten about, House Redoran makes you do the exact same thing. You have to buy the land deed for 5,000 septims. I honestly didn't remember that part, so I guess if you do either house's storyline, have your TFSA ready, Tamriel's full savings account. Purchasing the land deed, that checks off both prerequisites for Rethan Manor's pre-construction. Heading back to Balmora and touching base with Dondos, he says that he'll give the order to start building. This is the part where the Nerevarine can go about their life and embark on separate adventures. Or, if you're really invested, like me, you could just sit in the corner for 5 business days and wait for the journal update. The choice is yours. When ready, I return to Dryler and continue to discuss the Stronghold. This next part is fairly standard. In fact, all 3 of the Great House questlines make you do this. Dondos asks that I check in with the Stronghold's progress. I'm to head to the building site of Rethan Manor and talk to the foreman, Durble Grorush. I'm pretty sure this part was added in just so the player could see where exactly their stronghold is being built, as normally it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I will say though, House Hlaalu is the easiest one to get to. Rethan Manor is practically right beside Balmora. You just have to follow the Odai River. If you were to compare it to, say, Tel Uvarith, I'd consider it a walk in the park, or really a walk in the river. As per usual, this stronghold is a mere shell of what it will be. However, you can use this time to get a gauge for its aesthetic, architecture, and overall area. Chatting with the foreman, Grorush more or less says, "Why are you here? There's nothing to see." Fair enough, returning to Dondos, he says that it's all going according to plan and tells me to check back later. Oh, the adventures, secrets, and storylines you could discover within those 5 business days. As soon as the next journal update hit, I spoke again with Dryler. For Phase 2, the Kinsman said that there was room for improvement at Rethan Manor. For instance, I could find some business to engage in. The examples he provided were farming and egg mining, although the only option I could pursue is the latter. The closest vacant egg mine to the Stronghold is Shurdan Rapley. However, there are a few issues with it. Firstly, the mine is blighted, so if I want miners to actually work in there, plus an ample supply of healthy Kwama eggs, I'll need to cure the queen. Secondly, I'll need miners. Dondos believes that I could find workers in either Nissus or Sadrith Mora. Well, luckily for me, Nissus seems to be the place to be. In the past, when I've needed scrolls for curing blight, my go-to NPC has always been Hetman Abulmawia. He has a hut on the southwestern side of town. One scroll costs about 100 gold, but in my opinion, it's worth every Tiber. As for finding workers, I had the ability to ask some of the other NPCs around town. The name I kept hearing was Ilisaur Ten Cimmerian. Everyone kept saying that he lives on the northern side of town, in between the temple and the mines. In my opinion, this wasn't descriptive enough. It's totally the game that deserves the blame here and not my observational skills. I spent the next while looking for Ilisaur's house and drove myself mad following those directions. The only places in between the temple and the mines were Arvstrelin and Ten Cimmerian cave dwelling. Not obvious at all. Slapping my forehead and heading on inside, I found my target and brought up the prospect of work. I told him that I'm opening up the Shurdan Rapley mines and needed workers. Luckily, there wasn't much persuasion needed here. When you need a job, you take what you can get. Despite the blight and dangerous threats, Ilisaur says that him and his workers will head for the mines in the next couple of days. Great, now to just cure the blight so you all don't die terrible deaths. Fortunately, this next step is pretty trivial. Heading back to Balmora, I made my way to Rethan Manor and followed the instructions. As it would turn out, there are a lot of egg mines in the area, and of course, Shurdan Rapley would be the last one that I stumbled onto. Honestly, it took me more time to find this dungeon than it did to cure it of its blight. As soon as I came across the mine, all I had to do was stick out my katana until I had reached the queen. Once I made it to her, a simple use of Dayr's blessing did the trick. The queen was healthy, eggs were ripe for the picking, and workers were headed for the mine. The wheels of business go round. Returning to Balmora, I reported my success to Dondos, and once again, I had 5 productive and bountiful business days to take care of other matters on Vardenfell. Once those were put to great use, I spoke again with Dryler and asked about Rethan Manor's progress. The kinsman said that the improvements were complete and that Phase 2 of construction had concluded. In order to move on to Phase 3, I need to be made a counselor of House Hlaalu. In due time, that could happen, but for now, this was as far as I needed to go. This should be enough to continue my work with Crassius Curio. Checking in on Rethan Manor, it's admittedly my favorite of the 3 strongholds. Proximity to a major city has a lot to do with that, but I also really like the look and layout of it. It feels the most homey out of the three, and unlike Tel Uvarith, there's a nice wall that surrounds the settlement, so it feels extra protected. Before, I mentioned that, in a way, forking over the 5k septims was like an investment. Well, the Stronghold is now decked out with expensive items. There are weapons, armor, and miscellaneous goods that are ripe for the picking. The main building contains ebony arrows and darts that you can sell and easily make your money back on. Furthermore, there's an ebony longsword on the nearby table that can be pawned off for a small fortune. You spend a little to make a lot. For now, that's where the Stronghold progression ends, and the rest of the questline continues. Returning to Uncle Crass in Vivec, word seemingly got to him that I was now the owner of Rethan Manor. Because of that, we completely bypassed the formalities of rank and Stronghold. Getting right into the next mission, Curio gave me the infamous task. The missions that come up for all three great houses. Destroy the other two factions. Destroy isn't really the correct term, it's more like knocking them down a peg. Basically, both the Telvanni and the Redoran have built illegal strongholds. Where I had to ask the Duke for permission and acquire a land deed, they seemingly just said to oblivion with it and did their own thing. For some reason, this really grinds the gears of each faction, in this case, House Hlaalu, and because of that, there's now a demand for blood. First up is teaching House Redoran a lesson. Lord Banden Indarys is at Indarys Manor over in the Bal Isra region. Bal Isra is not too far from Aldrun. I'd consider Indarys Manor the second most convenient stronghold to get to. Depending on the type of person you are, it could be the second least convenient, whatever floats your boat. Now, the awesome part about these Karen quests is that you have the opportunity to loot these strongholds out of house and home. More or less, Indarys Manor is outfitted with these same types of items as Rethan Manor. As soon as you take care of Banden and Indarys, the only aggressive NPC in the building, a level 19 warrior that fights with his fists, the Stronghold is your oyster. Ebony weapons, powerful potions, jewelry boxes, it's definitely a fruitful venture. What's more, returning to Curio and informing him of my success, he gifted me with 1,000 more septims. If you played your cards right, House Hlaalu can turn you into Vardenfell's richest outlander. With that, thus ends the quest, kill Banden and Indarys. Chatting with Uncle Crass once more, he gives me my next assignment. Honestly, I really thought that I'd be taking care of House Telvanni next, but not quite. Curio thinks it'd be in my best interest to win the support of at least one more counselor. Of all the Hlaalu higher-ups, Crassius suggests that I turn my attention to Bero. Apparently, he's the only other councilman who's likely to sponsor an outlander. Sounds simple enough, except for one small detail. No one really knows where to find Bero, not even Curio. Most people know that he lives somewhere here in Vivec, but they're not entirely sure where. Well, crunching the numbers a little bit, select NPCs claim to have seen him in the St. Ohms Canton. Heading over there and working the lines even more, the next clue is that he frequents the Plaza District. Getting warmer, this is unfortunately where the trail comes to an instant freeze. No one else has any further information on Dram, and from here, it's up to the player to figure the rest out. Well, having done the Morag Tong questline, the main story, and the side quest, Vasir Didanat Ebony Mine, I more or less knew where to continue the search. Eventually, your curiosity might have gotten piqued for the so-called Haunted Manor, and I imagine that would have led you inside of it. The first room doesn't reveal much, other than some spooky noises and abandoned quarters. However, there is a door that leads further into the manor. Unlocking the level 50 passageway, the house turns from creepy to quite nice. This area is clearly lived in and well maintained. It doesn't take long to find the owners as well. The first person I saw was a Nord named Guarding the Bolt. He pretty much tipped me off that Bero was nearby, as he literally says that the councilman's in the next room over. Heading into Dram's quarters, I located the Hlaalu rep and got to talking business. Right away, he knew that I was here for a sponsorship. Instead of charming him or running some errand, he instead gave me an arguably more fun trial. Bero wanted to see if I was as strong as I am clever. His words, not mine. If I can defeat his champion, Guarding the Bold, he'd gladly sponsor me. Agreeing to the matchup, Dram says to hash out the details with Guarding. Furthermore, if I come out victorious, the counselor would prefer that Mr. Bold's life gets spared. I've always found it funny when someone asks me to spare a life in a duel like this, because I know very well that I was never given that same courtesy. In any case, the conversation with Garding is extremely brief. He just tells me to meet him in the arena canton. I decided to leave the Nord's life up to fate. If the game chose divine intervention and wanted him alive, I'd gladly accept. Otherwise, to Sovngarde he goes. Garding is a level 19 barbarian and relies on his fists to fight. Characters with loads of stamina should have nothing to be worried about here. After a few softball pitches, Garding calls time and ends the battle. I have no idea if he just got lucky and his health managed to drop below the threshold, or if this was going to happen no matter what. But Garding lives to fight another day. He vows to tell Dram about my victory, and from here, I'm free to return to my new sponsor. The conversation with Bero is also brief. He cuts to the chase and says that since I defeated his champion fairly, he'll support my claim to the council. Sounds good enough for me. Chatting with Crassius will initiate the next quest, so I'll get around to that later. If you're watching the full compilation, later is likely in 30 or so seconds. At this point in the questline, I only have 6.5 more missions to go. I've risen through the ranks, reached House Brother, got rid of corrupt noblemen, built my own settlements, and knocked House Redoran down a notch. With the storyline coming to an end, one can only wonder, where does the plot go from here? How much more up can we go? Well, as it would turn out, there's plenty of room for progression still, so much so that it'll lead House Hlaalu literally all the way to the top.